Hello, my name is PJ, and I am an alcoholic. Welcome back to the book study, the way I see it, because that's the only way I can talk about it, is the way that I see it. Welcome to 2023, January 1st today, 2023, a new year. Maybe some of you got New Year's resolutions. I was daydreaming, meditating on it I'm sure there's somebody out there who's getting sober. January 1st, New Year, New Year's resolution. I was thinking, what would a resolution be? A good one. And the phrase came to me, trust God, clean house, help others. It's something that people say the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the program of Narcotics Anonymous is easy. Trust God, clean house, help others. So that would be a good resolution. If you don't have one, maybe that's the one. That's the one. I feel like that would be a good one. I tell new people to the program, I say, don't worry about the trust God thing. Just do the other suggestions in the program, and you'll see weird coincidences start to happen that allow you to open up your mind a little bit more to maybe that there's something more going on here than meets the material eye. Yeah, my sponsor will tell me, he's like, I never asked if you believed. He's like, I didn't ask if you believe in God. He's like, it has nothing to do with it yet. Right now, at this time, he said, I just pray. Just do the work and you'll get the results. Doesn't matter if you believe. He said, just pray and live by the other principles and good things will happen. So, trust God, clean a house, help others. Don't worry about trusting God right now. Just keep an open mind. Keep an open mind that maybe there's some areas where we were wrong. Some areas we might be right, but there's some areas we might be wrong. And chapter 4, we agnostics. It doesn't say you agnostics. It doesn't say that we came to the other side of this and now we're not agnostics. And now that I practice a 12-step program that I'm not agnostic and you might be, you agnostics. It doesn't say you agnostics. It says we agnostics. Well, before we even jump into this, let's take a look. We got the dictionary out and open. An agnostic, a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God or anything beyond material phenomena. A person who claims neither faith nor disbelief. Right? So, like I said, an open mind. I'm open-minded to some of my spiritual beliefs having potential to be real deal, legit stuff. And I kind of shrug my shoulders that it might not be. I was wrong in the past about a lot of things. I could be wrong about this. I'm very open-minded. If someone else shares new information with me, I don't shut it down immediately. I listen and I say, maybe that's it. Kind of for my own personal guide, judge of things. I see, how does that information resonate with me on like a deep soul level? Like my spirituality now came from a place of stuff that resonated with me. But before sobriety, for sure. I knew nothing. A person who believes that nothing is known. Okay. Yeah. Right. Like we don't know anything. We don't know what happens after death. We don't know a lot. As a human, there's a lot I don't know. Or can be known of the existence or nature of God or of anything beyond material phenomena. A person claims neither faith nor disbelief in God. So I don't know. Here we are. Atheists are people who don't have a belief, who believe it doesn't exist. So, but just the same as to say people who believe it does exist and people who believe it doesn't exist, I don't think that either of them can be proven. So that puts me or us, we, in the category of agnostics. We agnostics. Enough rambling. Let's see what the book has to say about this. Enough listening to me. I'm just a guy staying sober one day at a time. Let's get into the book. Let's get into the book that presents Alcoholics Anonymous and their take on this chapter. We Agnostics, chapter 4. Let's go. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take in, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. I love this. I love this right here. It's like, if alcoholism's a disease, how come it was a spiritual solution that was the solution for me, right? I am fully convinced I have alcoholism, addiction, and a spiritual solution ended up being the banger, the one that hit the nail on the head, that made me feel good, okay, made me, it brought me to recovery. My sponsor said, Paul, you hadn't relapsed in the past. He said, you were sick. You were as sick as you were. You were as sick as you always were. You just went back to drinking time and time again. You hadn't actually ever recovered. So here I sit in front of you guys today, and I do truly feel recovered. I have inner peace. I have serenity. I feel comfortable in my own skin. I don't have depression. I don't have anxiety anymore. I feel recovered. And here it was, a spiritual solution, a spiritual experience. Because of why? Because when I honestly wanted to, I could not quit. Or I had little control over the amount that I intaked into me. So here it is. Only a spiritual experience will conquer. We talked about that in the doctor's opinion. So let's keep going. Because, we agnostics, well, this is kind of sketch, talking about a spiritual experience when we just established, I've got some agnosticism. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Just gonna highlight that. But it isn't so difficult. About half of our original fellowship were exactly of that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Dun, dun, dun. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you, but cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Right? You hear the saying, God did for me what I could not do for myself. Right? Our human resources were not sufficient. Lack of power was the dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Boom. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main objective is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we're going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostic. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problem and explain our fellowship. But his faith falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular concept because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. And I personally didn't get tons of spiritual lightness and feeling of I didn't get a lot of feel good sitting in church as a kid. It was more of one of those kind of dry religious environments. So I was like, you know what, this God thing is not for me. But having freedom to explore my own idea of a higher power, listening to books, watching documentaries, I was able to find some stuff that resonates with me and makes me feel connected with the universe, with God, with everything, spirituality, connection. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. What does that mean? Like skeptically looked? We got the dictionary out, so let's get it. Let's see what it says. Suspicion and disapproval. Right on. We looked with suspicion and disapproval at many individuals who claim to be God. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking we went enchantedly by a starlit night. Who then made all of this? This was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. And I think there's a deep part of us who has that wonderment, who has the curiosity for something greater than ourselves. And without that, we feel empty. But it's such a fleeting, distant thing. This yogi, someone asked this yogi in the East, they said, Yogi, what is wrong with the West? Like, look at that. You see the news, people fighting, arguing, angry. What's going on? And the yogi says the West has completely severed its cord with spirit. And unless they can reconnect with spirit, things are kind of gloomy. So I think a lot of us have that wonderment. I've been able to repick that up. Life was more exciting when I believed in Santa Claus. Now, I'm not saying Santa Claus is real, but life was more exciting when I believed in some mysticism. So here I am now, and I'm able to, I'm encouraged to keep an open mind to some of that same, it's not the same, but mysticism, again, on a more mature level than Santa Claus. Research it. Have an open mind. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We've found that as soon as we're able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commence to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. So it says, we found that as soon as we're able to lay aside prejudice or even express a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commence to get results. It's like my sponsor says, he says, I didn't ask you if you believed He said, just take the suggestions, do what we do, and you get what we get. And if you hit your knees and you pray every single morning for 9 months and your life gets better and better and better and better, at that point, you might start to have an open mind. Give it a go. See what happens. Mess around. Find out. Find out what's good. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. So as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, we began to possess a new sense of power and direction. So as soon as we admitted the possible existence of something, we began to possess a new sense of power and direction, taking some simple steps on top of that. So the hoop is wide. Keep an open mind to it. That's all you need, an open mind. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean our own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you'll find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At this start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. After we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach, that was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited that was. There it is. It can be limited. We need to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we empathetically assure him that he is on the way. Just being open-minded, willing to believe. You don't need to believe yet. You just need to be open-minded to believing in the future if certain things happen, right? So you don't have to believe now, but you just have to be willing to believe, right? I'm willing to believe if. So if I'm living in the gutter, my life is terrible, and I am willing to believe, but only, if my life gets better, that's good enough. Because you do this stuff and your life will get better, and then gotcha, right? I'm willing to believe if my life gets better, okay, we'll do this stuff and watch your life get better, and then okay, boom, there you are. Your life got better, and that was your, kind of your gate to that. We need to ask ourselves one short question. Okay, we did that. It has been, right here we are, it's been reportedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderful, effective spiritual structure can be built. Right? So, as soon as a man can say he's willing to believe, not believes, but is willing to believe, if X, Y, Z, whatever, willing to believe, wonderful effective spiritual structure can be built. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes, but I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. This is an interesting this is an interesting paragraph for me. I used to be jealous of people who had some sort of spiritual belief, and there they go, and their lives are okay. Maybe they have a nice wife and kids, and they're relaxed, and they're just cruising through life. And I was like irritated by it. And I was just like, the joke is on you. Just wait till you find out that there's no such thing as God. And then there I go, being anxious and depressed and miserable and shoving alcohol and drugs into my body. And I'm just like, the joke is on you. The joke is on you when you find out that's a bunch of bullshit and you're just confused. You're so confused that you have a good life. Right? So there I was being absolutely miserable while the other guys go around and have good lives who have some sort of spiritual belief. So finally, one day I was like willing to be like, all right, you know what? People who are open-minded to this stuff have a better life than I do. So maybe it's time I open my mind to it so I can have a bad life, because it's me who suffers when my life is bad. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, or unreasonable prejudice. Handicapped by obstinacy. The quality or condition of being obstinate, stubbornness. Handicapped by stubbornness, right? Like there I go being miserable while these other people have good lives. And I'm just like, the joke is on you. You'll see. Stubbornness. All right. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. Let me see. Antagonism. I think that means like to go against. I think the antagonist is like the hostility, opposition. Yeah, the antagonist in the story is the opposition. Bristle with hostility. This sort of thinking has to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no greater difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us, right? Alcohol was a great persuader. Alcohol whooped me, beat me up, and said, "Are you ready to try something new yet?" I'm like, "Nope." Beat me up again. "You ready to try something new yet?" "Nope." Beat me up again. Finally, it beat me into a state of reasonableness where I put up the white flag and I said, all right, you got me. What should I do? What should I do? I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I was like, what should I do? I know nothing about being happy. I know nothing about being sober, and I know nothing about being happy and sober. My life is miserable. My ass is whooped 10 times over. What should I do? I said, all right, here's some simple suggestions. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of a doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes there is. All right, let me stop. I don't know if it's going to go further into that. But electricity. Like, a lot of people don't understand truly on a deep PhD level how electricity works. But I'm more than happy to use it. I don't need to know how electricity works to flip on my light switch and enjoy having some light while I'm trying to eat my dinner, right? I can enjoy the benefits of something without knowing how it works. When I flip on that light, I have faith that the light is going to turn on without knowing how it works. It's the same thing here. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel gritter is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption suggests that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments that we believe the universe needs no God to explain it. Where our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Mr. Alan Watts, he's kind of like a interesting guy. He's like a philosopher of sorts. And he said, what's more likely? He said that intelligence came from nothing. Because I would like to think I have some intelligence. He said it. What's more likely is that intelligence came from nothing. And I believe intelligence exists because I believe that I have some. What is more likely? That intelligence came from nothing, or that intelligence was split up into smaller chunks of intelligence, right? Makes more sense that there's billions of people on this planet that were all little slivers of intelligence that came from greater intelligence. I don't know. Let's keep going. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? It's an interesting thing. If I'm the smartest being in the entire universe, that's pretty sad and scary. And I know Einstein is smarter than me. Elon Musk is probably smarter than me. Stephen Hawking is smarter than me. No, I shouldn't say probably smarter. Yeah, they're smarter than me, right? But if they're the smartest beings in the entire of the universe, that's some scary stuff, right? So, to think that humans are the alpha, the omega, the last word of intelligence is rather vain, egotistical. I would like to think there's something smarter than me out there. I hope so. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we have observed that many spiritual-minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds are demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. So this paragraph is exactly what I was talking about before. You know, I used to cynically amuse myself dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when I observed that other spiritual minded people had stability and happiness and usefulness, which I should have sought myself. That's the story of me being like laughing at people who believed in God, thinking, hey, the joke's on you. Well, I was miserable and useless and had no stability in my life. Instead, we look at the human defects of these people and sometimes use their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance. Well, we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. Right? I figured I would give this spiritual side of life a fair hearing a few years ago, 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, 4.75 years ago. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than themselves. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. It's important. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions of each individual to settle for himself. That's you, herself, himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than themselves. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As the celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declared they since have come to believe in a power greater than themselves and to take a certain attitude toward that power and to do certain simple things. There has been a revolutionary change in the way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seemingly futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy go of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most powerful, important factor of their lives. They present a powerful reason why one should have faith. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all of the millenniums went before it. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today, yet in ancient times material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. Right? Like, people used to think the world was flat. You know, it seems they were wrong. So I just have to be very open-minded to this idea that I might have been wrong. I personally believe I used to be wrong about a lot of things. My old belief system came with a really low quality of life. New one comes with a better quality of life. I'll take the better quality of life. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as we were the ancients about the realm of material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proven man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved the privilege to the birds. Only 30 years later, this conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of rocket, and he will say, I bet they do it, maybe not so long either. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadgets which does not work for something new which does? That sentence was a lot for me. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new that does, right? Yeah, I'll adopt new gadgets all the time if they work better, right? This computer works better than the old one I had. I adopted that. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. This reminds me of something I've been talking about lately, is that we will put so much effort into getting good at the toppings of our life. I will put in so much effort into getting good at hockey. If I want to get good at hockey, I will put so much effort in getting good at calculus. If I want to get good at calculus, I will put so much effort into waking up early to work overtime to get more money. These are all toppings, but at the same time, I was never putting in effort to get good at the core cake of life, is just being good at life, right? What does it say? Where does it say? We had trouble with our personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. Were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had feelings of uselessness. We were full of fear. We're unhappy. We couldn't seem to be a real help to other people. So we're not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flights? Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether or not we could do calculus, whether or not we could work extra overtime, whether or not we could learn how to trade financial markets? We put so much effort into doing things, but we don't actually put the time and effort into getting good at being alive. That is why Alcoholics Anonymous, living by these principles, practicing these principles in all my affairs, is my priority, because with that, I'm good at life. I have a solid, nice core that I can put all sorts of fancy toppings on top of. When we saw others solve their problem by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. It sounds like a leap of faith right there. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith in that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted the rights would never fly. Right? Self-sufficiency didn't work very well for me. My old strategy didn't work very well for me. I didn't have a strategy before. I needed a strategy for life. It was silly to think that I didn't need a strategy or that I come up with my new myself, reinvent the wheel. I'm going to have a strategy for life and I'm going to come up with it. That's New Year's resolution. This is my strategy. This is how I'm going to live, and fail, 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 fail. Finally, I was like, you know what? I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Tell me what to do. I'll do it. Boom. Solid life. Now I can have some fun. Logic did great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it is more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy. When we threw up our hands in doubt, we said we don't know. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we are given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. Logic, huh? Logic. Let's take a look. I think I know what logic means, but if you asked me if I know what logic means, I would say yes. So logic, reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. A particular system of codification of the principles of proof. What? The quality of being justifiable by reason. Reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. An active analysis, a situation coming up with a sensible solution. Critical thinking is similar to critical thinking. I think this is just like our problem-solving abilities as human beings. I think that's what that's getting at. And that as human beings, logic is great stuff. So when we became alcoholics, crushed by a sense-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Reminds me of this quote I like: God is both the art and the artist. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines of this promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. That was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? For did not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but sort of faith? But a sort of faith. Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all of the time. My sponsor says, look, you might be agnostic, you might be atheist, whatever. He's like, you worship something. I had faith that the drugs and alcohol were going to relieve my pain. I worship drugs and alcohol. I thought about it all day. I knew if I could just get some more, I'm going to be okay. I worshiped it. Some people worship power. Some people worship money. Some people worship their girlfriend, right? So, something to think about. Oh, I forgot to switch the screen back. My apologies. Here we are. Where were we? Let me look. You guys could still hear me. It's been a second since I highlighted something. My apologies for that. Here we are. Page 54. Just got done reading this. Discovered faith had been involved the whole time. As I said, I had faith that the alcohol was going to give me emotional relief. We found too that we had been worshipers. That's what I was saying. We worship something. The state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on that. What a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves, and then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower, who of us had not loved something or someone? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else, right? I had faith that alcohol was going to make me feel better. As long as I can have a couple drinks, the wedding's going to be okay. As long as I can smoke some weed, school's going to be okay. As long as I can smoke some weed, everything's going to be okay. As long as I can get some more money, everything's going to be okay. Imagine life without faith, where nothing left but pure reason. It wouldn't be life. We had believed in life, of course we did, but could not prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between points. Yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling onto a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seemed more intelligent than that. At least, so the chemist said. Hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanate from our best minds. What about people who prove that man could never fly? Yet we have been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from the world, people who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or another it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. So I find it rather peculiar that I feel empty hole in my inside my stomach that alcohol would fill and make me okay. I find it rather peculiar that I feel like I'm missing something without drugs and alcohol. And the solution for that feeling ends up being a spiritual connection, a connection with a higher power. It's really weird that drugs and alcohol is replaced by a connection with a higher power. And the solution, the connection with a higher power, is a healthy, sustainable one that fills the same hole that drugs and alcohol filled. Rather weird how well they both fit into this same spot. I tell people that empty feeling inside, how do you fill it up? Emotional, vulnerable connection with others, a connection with yourself, self-love, and a connection with a higher power. You get those three things going, whoop, it fills up that hole inside. I had that hole and alcohol filled it. I had that hole and I got a dog. His name is Pablito. I would squeeze Pablito. And it helped me feel a little bit better, but it wasn't enough. I was still empty inside. Here I am today. I love squeezing Pablito. It adds, though. It adds. It's icing on the cake. I feel full. I feel okay. I'm good. Don't need the drugs and alcohol to do that for me anymore. It was a very unhealthy way to feel that, right? We can only clear the ground a little bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. So yeah, this is basically saying if you got an open mind, come join us. See what happens. In this book, you will read the human experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered him and depressed him. Post-war delusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. One night, he confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I've known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded all else out, all else. Who are you to say there's no God? This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty of majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his creator. Right? Like, assuming there is a God or a power greater than yourself, I would have felt pretty stupid if I lived my whole life saying, nope, not true. And I was miserable my whole life on top of that. And then I found out, passed away someday, that I was wrong. Who am I to say there is no God? Right? I'm not qualified to say that. This was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude has shaken it. Just because we're on a roll. Vicissitude. A change of circumstances or fortunate. Typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant. No later circumstances has shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away that very night. Years ago, it disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink was never returned. At such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. This is powerful stuff. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his maker. Then he knew. Circumstances made him willing to believe. Circumstances made him open-minded to believe. He humbled himself, and things got better. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. There it is. Who was I to say that there's no power greater than myself? Who was I to say there's no God? Right? I don't know. Unless you guys got like some real deal evidence that I haven't seen, right? So far, I don't know that there's any scientific evidence that suggests that there's not. Well, it seems there's some scientific evidence to suggest there's something going on. It was University of Virginia did a study where they have tons of documented cases of these kids being able to remember in great detail their past life. It's another one of those things I just keep an open mind to. Very cool. Would be cool if it was, So, that is it. Chapter 4. We agnostics. That is the way that I see it. My name is PJ. I'm an alcoholic. Hopefully you guys are having a good weekend. Well, maybe you're listening to this on a weekday. But hopefully you have had a good start to year 2023. There's a good life out there waiting for you. Get after it. Good night.